Number 7.
This happened around 10 years ago. I believe I was 11 or 12. I still remember this like it was yesterday. Our house was kind of isolated. I mean, there were houses nearby and whatnot, but it was a bit further down the road. When I was younger, my family was in a bad financial crisis and we didn't have any fence or anything. We had a bush fence with a broken small door to the porch before the door to our house, and that's all we could afford. One night, I was playing some video games. I was alone with a friend of mine. My sister and my parents were out at the time. My female friend was 3 years older than me, which makes her 15. My family and hers were close friends for a long time. She was like a big sister to me. You could almost say that she was babysitting me. Anyway, she went to get some water and she comes back running towards my room and tells me to turn off my gaming console. I asked her why she was so scared and she turns off my PS2 and my light. She tells me to stay close to her. I start to freak out and she tells me that she saw 2 older men outside my house with a camera filming my house. My friend and I tiptoe around my house for a knife in the kitchen in the dark with no light anywhere, and I see one of the men trying to open our door by fidgeting the door handle. My friend starts to freak out and sees one of the men trying to pick the lock to the door or something. The other guy is nowhere to be seen. Now, my dad had a gun given to him by a close friend. My dad never used a gun before and never used the one he was given by his friend. My friend knew about this family gun and asked me where it was. I told her it's in my parents' bedroom at the top of the wardrobe. We both went to my parents' bedroom and my friend got the gun and loaded it partially with 2 or 3 bullets. Out of nowhere, we hear one of the windows breaking. We could hear the other guy very clearly, but still kind of muffled since they had a mask on. The one who broke the window was speaking to the first guy who was picking the lock on the door. He told him,
"Hey, get away from the door. I found a way inside. Kill the kid and get the girl."
At that point, I sort of freezed and almost blacked out a bit. I couldn't think straight. My friend started running with my dad's gun pointing towards them and screamed at the top of her lungs,
"If any of you motherfuckers hurt Igor or me, I'll fucking shoot your dicks off."
The men bolted just before entering the window, and my friend unlocks the door and started running towards them until she ended up on the street where my house was and shoots a warning shot into the air. I remember the shot being so loud since where I lived was a quiet place. She comes back inside the house, calls the police, my family and hers, and we tell the story to everyone. The police told us that there were some breaking and entering incidences near where I lived, and that some of the families were hurt, but no one was killed. Apparently, it seemed like these guys were amateurs. Many days passed and it seems like they may have found one, but they never found the other one. Thankfully, I've never had a similar experience to that ever again.
Number 6.
So, I'm a college freshman in the South. I'm also a female. Before I begin this story, I'd like to give a description of myself. I am a short, chubby black female. When I say short, I believe I'm just underneath average height, 5'4". I was across the street from a rundown gas station where I happened to work. On a night that I was working, my boss left me alone for that night because he hadn't gotten any sleep. Or that is what he said anyway, but it was a pretty slow day. There wasn't a specific reason why it was slow, it just was. I was playing Geometry Dash on my phone as I sat behind the counter. It wasn't a counter with the thick glass and speaking tube, it was just a regular counter. As I played my game, I heard the door open with a little chime from the bells. I looked up to see a man, about average height and very skinny, but for some reason a little intimidating. I was never the one to be afraid of anyone, so when I say that he was intimidating, he was. He was balding with a little comb over. He had on a dingy white t-shirt with holes and dad jeans that were caked in a dark red substance and mud. He seemed as if he had just been hunting, but I'm not sure. He looked at me. His eyes were hollow and empty, but still I smiled. "Hello, how are you?" common southern hospitality. He muttered something. I couldn't hear him and went to the back of the store. I watched him for a while before I eventually had gotten bored and went back to my game. After about a minute of aggravation, I clicked off the game and went to scroll down Instagram. When I glanced up, he was standing behind the aisle, just watching me. Upon reflex, I put my head back down, looking at my phone, but something told me to look back up. When I did, he was standing at the counter holding gummy worms and a beer. Did you find everything okay, sir? I say, a little startled, but I was okay. He didn't say anything. He just dug through his pockets and pulled out a dirty $10 bill. The total is $5.68, I say, as I grab the money, smiling at him. After I handed him back his change, out of nowhere, he shouts,
I hate all you niggers. You and the damn wetbacks.
Taken back by his comment, I couldn't say anything. I was just stunned.
Oh, you don't have nothing to say, huh? You niggers always have something to say. You never know when to shut your damn mouths. I swear to God, if I could hang you, I would.
I gasped and was about to tell him to get his fucking worms and can of spit and get the fuck out. But a few college guys burst through the damn door, alerting the both of us. He grabbed his shit and walked out. Luckily, one of the college students was someone that I had known. Hey there, he smiled, bringing me some Doritos and an Arizona iced tea. I guess the look on my face gave him an idea of how I was feeling. You okay? He asked. I shook my head. No, that man that walked out said that he wished that he could hang me. He started off with these racist comments. I didn't even do anything, I told him. I wasn't crying, I was just really mad. My friend asked if he should go look for him, and I told him no. I'll be fine, I assured him. He nodded and asked for a pen and paper. I ripped a piece of receipt paper off and handed him the counter pen. Okay, call me if you need me though, he says, writing his phone number down. His other friends come around with a bunch of food, and after that, they were on their way. After about another 2 hours or so, my boss and another co-worker came in, which means that I was off. I gathered my things, forgetting about the whole incident, and told them good day. I left and began my journey across the street. After about a good mile or so, I heard someone yell.
Hey sir, is there a reason for you to be here tonight?
I looked back to see campus security talking to a lanky man. My eyes began to focus into the darkness when I noticed that it was the racist guy from the station. His eyes were locked onto me, and it made me even more uncomfortable. He didn't respond, which made it menacing enough for me to leave. I began to walk quicker to my dorm and just forgot about the whole thing. He was caught and I was okay. Nothing else happened. The next day in the Union Center, I was doing some homework at a table and listening to some music when the guy that I had known sat down. Hey, I'm so glad you made it back okay, he smiles. I nodded. Yeah, thanks. He sighs. Because they found some guy on campus last night with a pistol and hunting knife. My stomach dropped when he said that. He was this skinny white man, and he kept mumbling some pretty racist shit under his breath, so I thought that was the guy that you told me about last night. He finished. I told him that I think that it was, and that he was following me back to my dorm last night. And as I thought, he was stunned for words.
Number 5.
My parents' house is modest but nice for the area it's in the north of England. When they chose that place back in the late 80s, they did so because it faces into a huge field, and in that area, greenery is in short supply. At the edge of the field, directly opposite their front door and window, is a dense line of tall trees. During the day, they make a beautiful view. At night though, they realized fairly quickly that the darkness just beyond those trees can be quite creepy. Not long after they moved in, they were burgled and were told by the police that, in all likelihood, the burglars had been watching the house from that tree line for days to learn their routine and wait for an opening due to a clear knowledge of the house's layout. After that, my father installed a house alarm. In the early 2000s, he installed a CCTV and a floodlight activated by motion sensor after a series of robberies in the area and some trouble with a group of local kids. The camera on the front captures their small garden, the dozen or so steps leading to the street, and a decent amount of the street beyond it. The floodlight normally activates if anybody gets anywhere past halfway down the steps. I went back to stay with my parents in autumn 2015 while I waited for my new apartment to be ready. They hadn't had any trouble from those kids for a long time, and there had been no reports of robberies in the area for about as long. Generally, it's the kind of place that I'd walk at night without giving it a second thought. Around 11 p.m. on my first night there, my father was at work and I was watching TV in the front room with my mum. Out of nowhere, there was a loud bang on the front window. I got up and went outside to investigate and was annoyed to find that the floodlight, it wasn't working. Lying in front of the window was a huge pile of dirt and rocks that somebody had obviously thrown from the front street. I looked up and down the street but couldn't see anything. I looked out towards the line of darkened trees and again, nothing. But have you ever had one of those weird feelings like there are eyes on you that you can't see? I just couldn't shake it. After going back inside, I asked my mum if I should go check the CCTV recording, and she explained that it had stopped working years beforehand, but they'd left a very obvious camera in place as a deterrent. Smart, I thought, but not so useful in this kind of situation, and obviously not doing much as a deterrent either. She also explained that they'd switched off the floodlight because a bunch of local cats used to think it was hilarious to set it off all through the night. And although you couldn't tell from the living room due to all of the indoor lights, it wasn't so fun from the upstairs rooms when it went off every 10 minutes and you were trying to sleep. The next day, my father decided it was time he replaced the camera, just in case anything like that happened again. He opted for one with infrared so that you'd still get a decent view of the garden and the street at night. He installed it, hooked it up to a DVR and set it running from that night onwards. The thing was tiny, barely noticeable from the street, and on the opposite side of the house to the huge, obvious older camera housing. Again around 11 p.m. on night 2, there was another loud thud against the front window. This time, me and my father went out to investigate. Again, nothing there except a pile of broken apart rocks and dirt which had been balled up and thrown. We went back inside, rewound the DVR by 5 minutes or so, and watched. Interview strolled a guy in a hoodie with his hood pulled up to obscure his face. He walked parallel to the house until he was directly opposite the window and stopped. He turned to face the window and just stood there, staring at the closed blinds for a good 30 seconds. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out what we assume was a clump of dirt, threw it and sprinted for the tree line opposite. We couldn't see how far in he went, but he slowed down just before dropping out of sight, so we assumed he was still there when we came outside, just watching. As I said, my parents dealt with this kind of crap from local kids for a long time, and they naturally assumed that that's what they were dealing with again. One of the kids, who was no longer a kid but an adult who hadn't done much growing up, still occasionally yelled things at them in the street, so he was a prime suspect. They agreed to switch the floodlight back on as an extra deterrent. The next day, my father dropped into the local police station and asked their advice on what had happened. Since there was no real damage done and the footage didn't actually capture a face, they said that there was nothing that they could do, but advised him to monitor the situation and come back if things escalated. That night, 11 p.m. came and went, and nothing. I remember my mother making a comment to the effect of being glad that whoever it was had obviously got bored and found something more interesting to do. Satisfied that nothing was going to happen, I had a quick cigarette at the front door, scanning the tree line as best as I could through the darkness, just in case, and then I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up early and looked out the bedroom window to the front garden. The gate leading to the steps was wide open, and I couldn't remember if it had been that way the night before. My mother was obsessed with it being kept closed and always complained about the postman leaving it open, so I assumed he must have done it again. When I got downstairs, there was no post waiting on the doormat. Not exactly damning evidence of anything, but it prompted me to check the DVR. I rewound it a couple of hours, and the whole time the gate was open, but no postman or anyone else for that matter. I kept going. 4 a.m., 2 a.m., midnight, open the whole time. As I rewound it all the way to 11 p.m. the night before, I saw a flurry of rapid movement on the recording. I played from 11 p.m. and the gate was closed. Around 11:15 p.m., a pair of headlights came from around the corner at the end of the street, and a large white van slowly pulled into view. It slowed more and more until it got level with the house and stopped. Out of it climbed the guy in the hoodie, again with the hood pulled over to cover his face. He reached across to the passenger seat and pulled out a heavy-looking bag. He gently closed the van door and walked straight to the front gate. He lifted the gate slowly from its catch and swung it open, making sure it didn't hit anything. Then he took a few steps down towards the door, cautiously. He stepped, looked around to make sure nobody was coming, and took a few more steps. Again he stopped, checked, and was obviously satisfied that he wasn't going to be confronted. Unfortunately for him, he took one more step and reached the halfway point on the stairs. On went the floodlight, lighting up our garden and our unwelcome guest. He froze again, clearly unsure what to do. Then he looked down at the bag in his hand and turned his face up to look directly towards the camera lens. The angle of both the floodlight and the camera meant I got a good look at just the bottom half of his face, and the big grin plastered all over it. And just like that, he turned around, strolled back up the steps and got into his van. With him gone, the floodlight switched itself off again. Except, he didn't leave. I watched the headlights get smaller as he reversed back the way he came and stopped at the end of the street, just within view. Then he turned off the engine and waited. At this point, I'd totally forgotten about the sequence of events from the previous night and felt a shot of ice go down my back when I saw a silver light appear as I opened the door and stepped just outside for a cigarette. I stood there obliviously scanning the trees in front of me, while 50 yards to my left, this guy sat, watching me. I disappeared back inside. A few minutes passed and the headlights flashed back to life, growing closer again. The van appeared behind them, crawling back to the house. It got right outside again, stopped for just a second and then pulled away, out of shot. Understandably freaked out, I told my parents and asked my father to go back to the police and tell them that we now had a trespasser. He did. Their response? That it was probably just somebody looking for directions, and in any event, without any way of getting an ID, it would be a waste of their time. They didn't even want to see the footage. Nice. We monitored the CCTV for the weeks I was there afterwards, but our nighttime visitor never came back. No idea what he wanted, why he was watching the house, testing our reactions, came calling when he knew that we were all home, or why he specifically targeted us in a row of terraced properties. But after getting a good look at that smile, I'm glad I didn't decide to go smoke a few minutes earlier that night.
Number 4.
It was about 9 years ago, and I was 14 at the time. My dad is an avid hunter, and although I never really caught the itch, so to speak, I still went with him pretty often. Just having the chance to escape to the wilderness was awesome for me. Anyway, it was in the middle of squirrel season, and we left for the campsite one afternoon to set up and prepare for the next morning. That night, my dad told me that he decided that I was old enough to hunt alone. Here in the South, that's kind of a big deal. Something of a rite of passage, I suppose. He tells me that he knows of a good location for me to go to. So the next morning, we go down to the bayou from our camp in my dad's boat, heading for our destination. My dad pulls up to the shore and tells me that he'll be back in around 2 hours to pick me up. It was still early morning and the sun hadn't really risen yet, so I step off the boat and find a comfortable tree to sit under until the sun came up, seeing as I didn't want to get lost in the woods. Once the sun had risen enough for me to see, I took off through the woods. Since I wasn't that big of a hunter, I really wasn't looking to get any game. I was just enjoying myself. I walked north a bit, looking for any signs of squirrel, tree branches shaking, broken nuts on the ground, that kind of thing. After a while, I found a small trail heading east and decided to follow it. When I say trail, I mean a deer trail, a path that some deer had cut through the woods. I walked maybe a good mile and bagged a few squirrels along the way. I realized that I'd been walking for about 45 minutes, so I decided to turn around and head back to where my dad had dropped me off. Once I turned around, I noticed another trail leading into a thicker part of the woods. I hadn't noticed it previously, and normally wouldn't have paid much attention to it, except for the fact that the trees had these weird symbols drawn into them. I almost want to call them Nordic runes due to the size, but they were much more intricate. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go down the trail, which was stupid of me, and to this day I still don't know why I did. I had been in the woods all my life and never was scared, but being alone in the woods is much different to being with someone, so I guess I was a little shaken. Anyway, the more I walked down the trail, the more confused I became. I saw more and more of the symbols in the trees, but there was also an eerie silence, which is really weird. Normally, you'd hear a squirrel or something, but it's like this specific part of the woods was dead. I had walked about a half mile to the best of my estimations when I noticed that a part of the trees ahead became lighter. I knew that meant that there was a clearing up ahead. I wish I never stepped foot into that clearing. What I found still disturbs me. It was a man-made clearing, that much was certain. The ground had been disturbed from where the trees had been cut down and the stumps removed. The trees surrounding the clearing were also covered in these symbols. In the middle of the clearing was a large stump. This stump must have been around 5 feet across, and in the middle of it was a dog, or coyote. Its skin had been removed and its stomach cut open, its intestines spilling out onto the stump, some of it falling onto the ground. I wasn't immediately sickened by it. I've cleaned wild game before, so I was sort of used to that kind of sight, but I've never seen a dog like that. I decided to get closer for a better inspection. And what disturbed and sickened me the most was that this was fresh. There were no flies anywhere near the carcass, and I know from experience what a freshly cut open stomach smells like, and I recognized that smell immediately. It being a cold October morning, I could even still feel the heat coming from its body. I started looking on the ground around the stump. For what, I don't know, but that's when I noticed the footprints. There were tons of them, all circling around the stump, along with a knife with a decorative handle very close to the stump. It was then that I noticed that I could feel someone watching me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want whatever or whoever had done that to the dog to have a reason to do it to me as well. So, acting as nonchalantly as I could, I turned around and headed out of the clearing, looking into the trees. I was trying to make it look like I didn't care and went back to hunting. It must have worked because I made it back to the main trail just fine. As soon as I did, I hurried back to the spot where my dad dropped me off, facing the woods, my shotgun at the ready, just in case. I never mentioned it to my dad, seeing as he would more than likely put it off as me trying to be funny. However, I did ask my grandfather about it, seeing as he had decades of experience in the woods. After telling him my story, he said something in French that I didn't understand and warned me to never go back to that part of the woods. He also said that if it had not been for me carrying a gun, I would not be there to speak to him. He refused to tell me anything more about it, and I've never been back to that part of the woods since.
Number 3.
A couple of years ago, I was living with my then partner, now ex. We'd been watching TV and I felt sleepy, so I decided to go through to the bedroom for a nap. I started to drift off when I became aware of a pair of eyes watching me from between a crack in the bedroom door. I couldn't make out anything else, just the eyes. The hallway beyond was pretty dark, so I sleepily assumed that it was my partner standing in the shadows and messing with me. I laughed and mumbled a half-hearted piss off and turned over to sleep. Except I could still feel the eyes on me, and now I was getting annoyed. Without turning back, I gave a louder warning that I wasn't in the mood for joking around and I'd like to be left alone. After a few seconds, I heard the door creak open just a little more. Still half asleep, I turned back and delivered a barrage of swears at the door. It was about half open now, filled with the blackness of the hallway beyond. Right at the normal height were the eyes again, and below them a big, toothy grin. Not a friendly one either. The grin was fixed like a skeleton's, and the eyes were unblinking and creepy. Assuming my partner was just being a dick, I drifted off. When I woke back up, not long later, the door was still open and the eyes and smile were still there. I was about to launch into an epic, sweary rant when I heard my partner sneeze through the wall connecting the bedroom to the living room. It wasn't my partner standing in the doorway. I freaked the hell out and rolled myself off the side of the bed and onto the floor. By the time I managed to pull myself up to look over the edge of the bed, the door was still half open, but there was no one else there. My partner wandered in, looking confused, and asked what the hell I was doing to make so much noise. I explained at about 100 miles per hour and eventually managed to calm down. We checked the whole flat from top to bottom, but found nothing. I barely slept that night. Mostly, I sat in the darkness watching the door to make sure it wouldn't open. I was told by a friend that it was all just a hallucination caused by when the body is transitioning between sleep states. In addition to sleep paralysis, some people can experience extremely vivid hallucinations or other sensory illusions. After that, I laughed it off and even gave the imaginary phantom a nickname, Smiler. A week or so ago, I got chatting to one of my neighbours in the lobby of the apartment block. He happened to mention that he recently caught our mutual landlady letting herself into his flat one afternoon for what she tried to claim was a random spot check, which is totally illegal. Another neighbour now claims to have seen her letting herself into my flat while I've been out and taking her time about it once she was in there. I'm now less convinced than ever that what I saw was just in my head. I've tried complaining to the agency who manages the property, but without hard evidence, it's difficult to prove anything. Now, I keep my keys turned in the door lock whenever I'm home, and I've got a camera watching while I'm out. So far, nothing.
Number 2.
My first babysitting gig almost got me and the kids killed, all because of one mistake. I was 14 at the time, and this happened sometime in the summer of 2014. I had known these kids and their parents almost since I was born. Our neighbourhood was very friendly and our parents regularly did stuff together. I remember this night very clearly over 2 years later, and it still terrifies me. The night this happened, our parents were going out to some fancy adult-only restaurant to celebrate my mum's birthday with the kids' parents. They said they'd be home around 11 and to remember to lock the doors. They had 3 kids, Haley, Alex, and Madison. Haley was the oldest. She was 12, almost 13. I know, it seems weird that I was babysitting a kid only 2 years younger than me, but Haley wasn't the most trustworthy kid. I think she would have been a much better kid if her friends weren't such bad influences. Alex was the middle child and their only son, and he was usually pretty good. He liked video games a lot and was usually pretty quiet. Madison was the youngest. I think she may have been 6 at the time, and she probably was the most difficult. She wasn't very good at listening and tried to act older than her age, swearing, refusing to sleep. She even stole stuff from her school more than once. So our parents met up and left around 7. I thought this was a pretty great deal since I was pretty close with these kids. They were usually pretty good for me, except Madison and sometimes Haley. So I figured this night was just an easy $60. But, as it turns out, it was probably the most terrifying night of my life. Madison wanted to play outside as soon as her parents left. I trusted Alex enough, but Haley usually had friends over and they got into stuff that they weren't supposed to. Mum's wine, Dad's cigarettes. She even found the credit card when she was 8 years old. So I told her to come out with us. She did come out, but immediately said that she was going to the store and walked away. I started to chase after her, but then Madison started to wander onto the road, so I just yelled that she'd better be back soon or I was calling her parents. I got Madison into their yard and we just played with the dolls for a while. I checked in on Alex a couple of times, but he was doing fine. Haley did come back eventually, but she had lied about the store. No surprise there, and instead had her friend Jess. They went inside and we played dolls for probably 10 more minutes. That's when I probably made the biggest mistake in my life, mostly because of Madison. This guy stopped his car right in their driveway. He asked if we were okay outside by ourselves. I had no idea why he chose us because there was probably 20 other kids outside at the time. I said that we weren't by ourselves and that our parents were right inside. But of course, Madison blurted out, "No, they're actually out at dinner." The guy smiled and told us to have a good night and be safe, don't stay out past dark, all that shit before leaving. Nothing struck me as wrong at first. I thought it was weird that he picked us out of literally 30 other kids, but figured that he was just concerned. His car looked fine. He didn't look like someone who would kill a child or anything. I was mad at Madison though, and reminded her of stranger danger, but she just called me a bitch and acted like nothing was wrong. It made me mad that she didn't understand what she had done wrong and called me a bitch, so I made her come inside with me. Haley and Jess surprisingly didn't get into the wine again, and Alex was fine. So I sat Madison down in the living room and we watched TV for a while. It was probably around 9 by now, so I told Madison that it was time to get ready for bed. She threw a fit and ran into the backyard. When I went to get her, I noticed a light in the woods behind her house, but thought it was just some kids playing in the woods. That honestly could have been what it was, but I'm convinced that I was wrong and it was something much worse. I finally managed to force Madison into bed and started to read her a story. She was actually pretty calm when she listened to me read, so I kept that up for a while, hoping that she would just fall asleep. And she actually did. So I went to check on Haley and Jess, who wouldn't open the door now. Alex was still in the basement on their Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, so I went down and made him come up to do something else. He was a pretty good sport about that and didn't complain, so he started watching TV and I finally started to relax. I was doing my own thing in the other room when Alex said that there was someone at the back door who said that he was the pizza man. I went in to see, and it was the man. Just on a side note, I'm not entirely sure that this guy was the same one from earlier, but come on, who else would know that we were home alone? I still didn't get that this man was bad news, so I asked him why he was at the back door. He said that he didn't see the front door, which was an obvious lie, but I didn't ask him. I told him to wait and went upstairs to yell at Haley for ordering pizza without my permission. She opened the door and said that she didn't before slamming it shut again. Haley lied a lot, but it was usually pretty obvious, and for whatever reason, I trusted her about this. I went down to tell the guy that he was at the wrong house when Alex told me that he had bolted as soon as I went up. I thought that he maybe figured out that he was at the wrong house and was embarrassed or something, so I told Alex that he could go down and play his game again. He was happy and ran back down into the basement right before there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw that the guy was just standing there, holding no pizza box and wearing no uniform. I didn't notice this at the time, but later realized when telling my hysterical parents and the police. "Sorry dude, you got the wrong house," I told him. I started walking back to the living room when I heard him say,
"No, this is the right house. The little redhead ordered it."
Looking back, I should have known right then not to let him in. How could he know that Madison had red hair from a phone call? She was a weird child, but I don't think she would have just randomly told someone that. I still didn't immediately recognize him as the guy from earlier, but I'm certain that it was him. He could have changed his look, or maybe I just wasn't remembering him. But when he said that, all I was thinking about was Madison. I ran upstairs to yell at her for ordering a pizza and still being up and somehow getting a phone. But when I ran into her room, she was still sleeping. I thought she was pretending, so I woke her up and she called me a bitch again. She said that she never ordered a pizza and I couldn't find a phone in her room, so I just let it go. She wouldn't go back to bed now, so I said that she could come and watch some TV with me. I know, I'm a terrible babysitter. We went downstairs and I went to tell the pizza man that this was still the wrong house, but he was gone again. I thought nothing of it and we got Alex up from the basement to watch TV with us. Thank God that we did. It honestly could have saved his life. We started to watch TV again when Alex said that he heard something in the basement. I paused the TV and he was right. There was something down there. I told the kids to wait there just in case there was a wild animal and went to open the door. What I saw still haunts me to this day. At the bottom of the stairs was the man holding a knife, slowly making his way up the stairs towards the door, towards me and the kids. He froze for a second when he saw me open the door, then started running. I screamed and locked the door seconds before he reached the top. He started pounding on it, screaming something that I couldn't understand. I was screaming now, and Alex came running in with Madison behind him to see what was happening. I grabbed them both without explaining and ran upstairs to Haley's room. She must have heard all the commotion and heard me crying because she didn't hesitate to open the door this time. She slammed the door and locked it, and I got out what was happening between sobs. She was crying and panicking now too, and so were Alex and Madison and Jess. We all ran into a closet and locked that too. We thought that it would buy us some time, but it was fucking scary though. Scariest thing that's ever happened to me anyway. Being locked in a small, dark space knowing that you could be killed any minute. Nobody should have to go through that. That was the most terrifying half hour of my life. We were all quietly sobbing and we could hear pounding downstairs, and then it suddenly stopped. We were even more scared now, thinking that he had broken the door and was on his way to kill us. But it was actually her parents coming to save us. The guy must have heard all four parents and realized that he couldn't take them all on. I guess that he ran off into the night because they didn't see him or even know about him until we told them what happened. I'll never know what happened for sure because they never found him. That sick fuck escaped into the night. Our parents were screaming our names when they realized what had happened downstairs. He had actually busted down the door and had ripped apart the living room and kitchen looking for us. If they had arrived any later, I might not be alive to share this right now. I only babysat a couple of more times after that. I had severe paranoia that this man would come back for me. I had a nervous meltdown more than once and had to leave. The man never came back, but I was sure that me living through that night was a mistake and this man was going to end my life. Please, anyone who's listening to this, remember to teach your kids stranger danger. Drill it into their brain. Lock your doors and windows too, because you never know what could happen.
Number 1.
I'm a 29-year-old guy from England. Near the end of August 2014, I was out with some friends in a bar to celebrate my birthday. It was near the end of the night and we decided it was time to go home, having been out for going on 8 hours by this point. We were up on the first floor of the bar and my friends went down to the staircase to the main doors ahead of me. For reasons my advanced drunkenness has caused me to forget, I decided to try and take a shortcut off of the stage next to the stairs instead. I'm guessing I just stepped off of the stage thinking that it was a short drop to the ground, but it was closer to about 5 or 6 feet and I hit the ground with my legs straight and my knees locked. And snap. I instantly knew that something was pretty seriously wrong. Cue a 999 call and surprisingly calm ambulance ride to hospital after being dosed up on gas and air. At the hospital, they gave me an x-ray and discovered I'd broken both of my legs. By this point, I sort of already guessed. Your right foot pointing down instead of up is a pretty good indication. And my heart sank further when the attending doctor told me that they'd have to admit me ahead of corrective surgery in the next couple of days. By now, they'd given me quite a bit of morphine and I was still huffing gas and air like a champ, so I was fairly out of it. A porter wheeled me up to the ward and introduced me to a nurse, who explained I was going to be put into a men's ward as they'd had to separate the genders the previous day into different rooms. I would have thought that they would have done this anyway, but whatever. Even out of it on pain meds, I remember thinking that it was a weird thing to mention. The nurse set me up in my room, right by the ward entrance. My bed was one of 5 in there and was next to the room's shared toilet and shower room. It was around 5 a.m. and the entire place was pretty quiet and dark. As the nurse took me through all of the admittance procedures, I could vaguely make out a guy in the bed opposite. Unlike the others in the room, he was awake and sitting up in his bed, watching me being brought into the room. I couldn't see his face, but the patchy white hair on his head was catching the moonlight coming in from the windows, so I guessed that he was an older guy. What struck me was how still he was sitting there, like a statue. No movement, no noise, nothing. Just sitting there, focused on me the whole time. Before the nurse left, I asked him to draw the curtain around me so I was shielded from view, and eventually I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next day to find my parents had been contacted and were sitting by my bed. Standing next to them was the guy from the bed opposite, chatting away like they'd known each other for years. I'm not exactly known as a people person, and given that for obvious reasons I was a touch grouchy, I'll admit that I was annoyed that my parents were letting a total stranger stand right over me while I was unconscious. Of course, they weren't to know that he creeped me out a little the night before, but still. He introduced himself. Here, we'll call him Mick. He seemed friendly enough, one of those harmless old men who comes across as lonely and keen to talk to just about anyone. He was in his early 70s, quite short and round, and was on the ward because he'd fractured his collarbone in a fall. When he eventually wandered off, my parents told me that he seemed to be a nice man, confirming that he just appeared to be pleased to have new people to talk to. During the course of that first day, my parents left and the doctors came around to fit me with splints before my surgery, planned for day 3. They made it clear that I'd be in hospital for at least a week and I wouldn't be walking for a few months at least. Not what I wanted to hear. During all of these conversations, Mick lurked nearby, listening in. When the doctors left, Mick came to my bedside. Rather than stand, he sat down in the chair next to me and asked me to repeat what the doctors had said. I wasn't in a mood to chat, and because I got it into my head that he was harmless, I asked why he'd need to know since he'd only stood a few feet away and must have heard everything. The second those words left my lips, his entire demeanor changed. The sweet old man that had been sitting in that chair was gone, and his face went blank, like it had flattened. He fixed me with this weird stare, and one corner of his mouth lifted in a lopsided grin.
My wife just died, you know.
Again, I'm not a people person, and conversations about death are way outside of my wheelhouse. I stuttered a little, trying to find appropriate words. I think I went with how sorry I was to hear that, and asked how long it had been. Given the odd grin, I guessed it had been a while.
About 3 weeks, just like that, gone.
His face never changed the whole time. It dawned on me that maybe he wasn't totally mentally present at that point. He never broke eye contact either, just looking at me, grinning. One of those looks that isn't immediately sinister, but then goes on just a little bit too long. Thankfully, the nurses came in at that point to serve dinner, and Mick retreated to his bed. He watched TV the rest of that day, and I put my iPod on, so I had an excuse not to make any more conversation. Right then, I just thought that he was a little left of normal, and it was more weirdness that I could deal with. When lights out came around, I asked the nurses to draw the curtains around my bed for me. Although I was still in quite a bit of pain, I drifted off early. I woke up in what had to have been the early hours of the morning. one of those gradual awakenings where you know something's not quite right but can't work out what. The ward was almost totally dark and silent again, especially around my bed with the curtains drawn. I assumed the weird feeling was down to, being in hospital with two epically shattered legs, and turned my head to the left onto the pillow. Then I rolled off of the opposite side in shock. Standing inside of the drawn curtain right next to my bed was Mick. Just stood there, watching me. Like you do when you've had a shock, I said something stupid. "This isn't where you sleep." Nothing. Same blank stare, same creepy half smile. Barely a ruler length from my face. I thought that he might have been sleepwalking, but he didn't have that glazed look to go with it. He seemed perfectly alert, just happy to be stood there, observing me. "Mick, how long have you been there?" That's when I got that special kind of chill you get when something really freaks you the fuck out. Rather than reply, he smiled really wide so I saw both rows of his teeth, and then shuffled back around the curtain to his own bed. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Because he never really left the room, and I certainly wasn't going anywhere, I couldn't really mention it to the nurses. I did text a few friends who were visiting the next day and told them to watch out for him when they came through. He stayed away during their visit and they said that he seemed like a normal old man, which he did at that point. As the day went on, I decided I'd made more of it than I should have, and was just on edge because of what had been going on, being in an unfamiliar surrounding, etc. That day, I went for my surgery. I came to about 6 hours later to find myself hooked up to a morphine pump. Hands down, the best medical invention ever. As a result, I was absolutely out of my tree high the entire evening and was in such a good opiate-fueled mood, I totally forgot about Mick. Big mistake. It got to the early hours again and I was playing a game on my phone obliviously. Because the nurses were checking me every hour or so, they disturbed the curtains around my bed a lot as they came and went. The last nurse had left a gap about 6 inches wide where the curtains met, typically right in the part opposite Mick's bed. Mick was a very, very loud snorer, and so I was reassured by the noises coming from him that he was very much asleep. I've got to assume because of the morphine, I stopped paying attention and suddenly realized that I couldn't hear the snoring anymore. I also couldn't remember how long it had been since I last heard it. I looked at the gap between the curtains but couldn't make anything out. I was just about to go back to my game when, from just the left of the gap, I heard my name being said. Not a normal way of saying it, not a whisper, more of a groan almost. Low and gravelly and menacing. I froze. I mean, what's the protocol when a pensioner has got out of bed in the middle of the night for the second night running to mess with you? I sat, paralyzed, with this odd sense of vulnerability. I was immobile. I couldn't really confront him or get up and leave. I was stuck in my bed, heavy bandages and braces around both legs and hooked to an IV. I slowly moved my hand down from my phone to the call button for the nurses. Just as my hand reached it, the long groaning of my name stopped. So did my hand. Had he seen me reach for it and gone back to bed? No, he was still there. About 30 seconds passed, presumably the length of time it took him to feel comfortable that I wasn't going to press the button. Then came the heavy breathing, long rasping intakes of air followed by extended groans to expel it, over and over, right at the foot of my bed. That was my limit. I hit the call button and the light went on above my head. I heard the buzzer sound down the hallway at the nurse's station. There was a burst of movement behind my curtains and I heard the nearby toilet door quickly open and close. Not long afterwards, a nurse responded to the call. Mick was still in the toilet, but because it was close by, I beckoned the nurse nearer so I could whisper. I told her what had happened and about the previous night and asked if something could be done. She nodded and said that she'd be right back. While she was gone, Mick emerged from the toilet and I heard him climb back into bed. Thankfully, the nurse had fully closed my curtains, so at least he couldn't see me now. An hour passed and eventually the nurse returned. I was expecting to be moved elsewhere, but instead she told me that I couldn't have a sleeping pill due to being on morphine. I tried my best not to be impolite and calmly told her that I didn't ask for a pill. I asked for something to be done about what had happened. The last thing I wanted was to deliberately knock myself unconscious with more meds. She sort of shrugged, half explained that all of the wards were full and disappeared again, telling me to get some rest. I didn't sleep for hours. Mick's snoring eventually resumed and the day finally caught up with me, so I cautiously allowed myself to drift off. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Mick made small talk which I didn't really respond to, and eventually he left me alone. That afternoon, a guy younger than me was admitted with a broken leg. This guy was 18 but looked about 12. It was ridiculous. But Mick didn't seem to think so, because suddenly this guy was the focus of all of his attention. I felt sorry for the fresh meat but grateful that I might be able to relax now. That night, I slept pretty well. That is, until 3 a.m. I woke up to a weird sensation on my left foot, the toes of which were poking out of the top of the bandages. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I saw Mick, again, stood inside of my curtains, playing with my toes, running his fingers along them, pinching them, moving them around like he wanted me to wake up and see what he was doing, but not looking at them, looking me dead in the eyes, unblinking, grinning. I'd like to say that I lost my shit with him, called the nurses in and had him moved elsewhere, but the mind's a weird thing, so I didn't. I just sat, open-mouthed, and watched him as he kept moving my toes around. I think it was disbelief that kept me quiet, mixed with fear. He might have had more than 40 years on me, but I was trapped in that bed and totally at his mercy, and so didn't want to do anything to piss him off. Eventually he seemed to get tired of messing with me and disappeared behind the curtains back to his own bed. For obvious reasons, I sat awake the rest of the night, watching and waiting for him to show his face again, but he didn't. Every now and then, I heard my name being groaned, low and long. By morning, I was a mixture of furious and terrified. I'm not the kind of person who assumes the role of victim very often, and so I hated how easily this old man had reduced me to a paranoid wreck. Every time he got up to stretch his legs or get some water, my entire body went rigid, expecting him to come back to my bedside. He didn't though, going back to devote all of his creepy attention to the new guy again. That afternoon, Mick was called away for a scan, and so I finally had some time to speak to the other 3 guys in the room about what had happened. None of them had any idea about Mick's nightly visits, since they were dosed up on pain meds themselves. One of the guys had been there longer than I had though, and he had been around when the wards were divided by gender. I asked him what had happened and he responded that he wasn't totally sure. He just knew that something had happened during the night and the next morning men and women were in separate wards. For obvious reasons, I had a pretty good idea of what that something might have been. When Mick got back, he glumly announced that he had been cleared to go home and had an ambulance booked to take him there in an hour or 2. He started making his way around the ward, saying goodbye to everyone. He left me until last.
You look after those legs in the future. They're fragile things.
I half smiled and, because I'm crippled with English politeness, told him that I hoped he felt better soon. Assuming the interaction was done and I'd finally seen the last of him, I picked up a magazine and started reading. No sooner had I done that, I felt pressure around my left foot. I looked up and was about to yell out until I saw what Mick was doing. His hand was clamped around my foot, squeezing it so hard that his knuckles had gone white. Thankfully, the break on the left was further up, and that stare was back, vacant but intense, with a creepy half smile. Before I could respond, his mouth opened and out came that same raspy voice I had heard saying my name in the night.
Very, very fragile.
He let go of my foot, turned around and shuffled back to his bed to pack. A couple of hours after that, he was gone. I did fill the nurses in before I was discharged, but none of them seemed to care all that much, dismissing what I'd experienced as either partly drug-induced or just misinterpreted. I don't think too often about Mick these days, now that I'm back on my feet and more or less back to normal. Every so often though, if I'm woken up in the night by a twinge in my legs, I remember those weeks in the hospital and make a little promise to myself to never wind up back there ever again.